The woman on mile marker 239. It happened on a cold November night in 2019, on a forgotten stretch of Highway 41 that cuts through the dense pine forests of northern Wisconsin. The air was heavy with fog, the kind that clings to the road like wet breath, and the temperature kept dropping every mile. I was hauling refrigeration units to Duluth, driving alone as usual, with nothing but the faint hum of my engine and the crackling static of late-night radio to keep me company. I'd been on the road since 6 p.m., and by the time I crossed into the forested section near mile marker 239, it was just past 1:30 in the morning. The first strange thing I noticed was how the fog seemed to thicken unnaturally fast. 1 second I could see 100 feet ahead, the next it felt like I was driving straight into a white wall. I slowed to 40, hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I was exhausted, yes, but not hallucinating. Not imagining. What I saw next was too solid, too clear. A woman stood on the shoulder of the road. She wasn't waving, wasn't walking, wasn't even shivering despite the cold. She just stood there under the busted green highway sign that read 239, wearing an old-fashioned white nightgown that reached her ankles. Her long dark hair clung to her face as if it was wet. And she looked directly at me. Not at my truck, not at my headlights, at me. I braked hard. Gravel scattered. My headlights washed over her, yet her shadow didn't fall naturally. It stretched wrong, as if bending against the light instead of with it. For a moment I thought maybe she'd escaped from a nearby house or wandered away after an accident. But this stretch of highway had no houses. No towns for 12 miles in either direction. No reason for any woman to be standing out here in the freezing dark wearing nothing but a nightgown. I lowered my window an inch. "Are you all right?" I called out. Her lips moved, but I heard nothing. She took one slow step toward the truck. Only then did I notice her bare feet, cut, scraped, and blue from the cold. There was mud on her legs. Pine needles. Her skin was almost gray. She leaned slightly toward my open window, and this time I heard her voice clearly. A whisper that felt too close, like she was standing inside the cab instead of outside. "Can you take me there?" I swallowed. "Take you where?" "To the place where they found me." Those words froze everything inside me. Before I could ask anything else, she opened the passenger door and climbed in. She didn't ask permission. She didn't blink. She just sat down, folded her hands neatly on her lap, and stared forward. Cold air flooded the cab, far colder than the night outside. Her voice was soft. "It's close." She didn't give an address. She didn't give directions. She just lifted a trembling hand and pointed down the road. I should have refused. I should have driven away. But something about her expression, a strange mix of grief and determination, kept me from arguing. So I drove. Slowly. The fog grew thicker. My headlights illuminated nothing but swirling white. The woman in the passenger seat didn't speak again, but every few minutes she would raise her hand and point, guiding me with those stiff, mechanical motions. When we reached a narrow side road cutting into the woods, she pointed there. The road had no sign. No markings. Just a rusted metal barrier pushed aside long ago. It looked abandoned, overgrown, a service path for electric lines or maybe an old fire road no one used anymore. "You're sure?" I asked. She nodded. I turned the wheel. Gravel crackled under the tires. The branches overhead formed a black tunnel as I inched down the path, and the fog spilled between the trees like it had weight. My GPS flickered, lost signal, and the radio dissolved into static. The woman finally spoke again. "Stop." I braked. The woods around us were silent, no wind, no insects, nothing. The silence felt thick, suffocating. "This is where they found me," she whispered. I looked through the windshield. My headlights revealed a small clearing. A wooden cross stood at the center, barely visible under years of moss. Beside it, half buried under leaves, was a shattered piece of windshield glass. And next to that, a cluster of wilted flowers. My stomach tightened. "You died here?" She slowly turned toward me for the first time since entering the truck. Her eyes were empty, clouded like old glass. But tears ran down her cheeks. Real tears. Cold and clear. "They never took me home," she said. "They found me here and left. Only the ones who see me can bring me back." Before I could react, before I could even ask what she meant, a freezing gust of air swept through the cab. The woman began to fade, not in a dramatic, glowing way, but like fog thinning at dawn. Her outline blurred. Her shoulders dissolved. Then her hands. Then her face. Her final whisper drifted through the air. "Thank you." And she was gone. I sat frozen for what felt like an hour. When I finally stepped out of the truck, the night was quiet again. The fog had thinned. The clearing looked old, untouched, abandoned for decades. No footprints marked the ground near the passenger side. Not hers. Not mine. Nothing but the cross and the broken glass. Back on the highway, my phone buzzed. Weak signal. I checked the time. Only 10 minutes had passed. The next day, shaken and unable to let it go, I stopped at a diner in the nearest town and asked the locals about the clearing off the old road. An older man at the counter lowered his coffee cup slowly and said he remembered the story. A young woman had been reported missing in 1987. They found her body near that exact spot after she'd wandered away from a crashed car at mile marker 239. She was wearing a white nightgown, he added quietly. Some folks say she still walks that stretch of road. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I didn't have to. His eyes told me he believed every word of whatever story he thought I was about to share. Later, alone in my truck, I rewatched the short video clip my dashcam captured during the moment she vanished. The footage was grainy, barely visible through the fog, but at the exact second she disappeared, the camera caught something unusual, a dense, swirling column of cold mist rising from the passenger seat before evaporating completely. Since that night, I've passed mile marker 239 only once. I don't stop. I don't slow down. And every time I glance at the shoulder of the road, I swear I can still see her silhouette standing there in the fog, waiting for the next driver who is willing to follow her into the woods and let her finally go home. The end. The black sedan that followed me for 40 miles. It happened in late October of 2021, on a long, empty stretch of Highway 93 between Kingman and Las Vegas. I remember the exact date because it was the night before Halloween, and the desert air had already dropped to near freezing after the sun went down. I was hauling a load of water tanks northbound, making the usual overnight run I'd done dozens of times before. It was around 12:45 a.m. when everything started. The highway was almost completely deserted, the sky moonless, and the desert around me nothing but black rock and wind-polished sand. This part of the road always felt isolated, but that night it felt like every mile pulled me deeper into a place cut off from the world. I had been driving for nearly 3 hours without seeing another vehicle ahead of me. The only lights on the horizon were from a distant service station 20 miles back. When I checked my mirrors the first time and saw nothing behind me but darkness, it didn't surprise me. But when I checked again 2 minutes later and suddenly saw a pair of dim headlights far in the distance, I felt an immediate, sharp jolt of unease. They hadn't been there a moment ago. They were too close, too centered, too deliberate. I told myself it was just another driver who had come around a bend, but the headlights stayed small and low to the ground, like they belonged to an older car. As I kept checking the mirrors, the lights gradually grew brighter and closer, yet never speeding or slowing, just maintaining the exact same distance. Something about that steady approach felt unnatural, like the driver wasn't following the rules of speed and physics. Then my radio suddenly went to static. I tried to adjust the dial, but every frequency dissolved into white noise. Even my CB crackled with a strange, hollow interference. It felt like the air around the truck had changed, almost like pressure dropped inside the cab. I tried calling out on the CB anyway. Breaker 19, anyone got a read on Highway 93 northbound? I've got a vehicle behind me acting strange. Nothing. Only static answered. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept glancing at the mirrors. The car behind me crept closer until the headlights filled the lower corners of my mirror. The vehicle was now no more than 50 yards behind me. At that distance I should have been able to see its outline clearly, but something about it seemed to distort in the headlights of passing reflectors. The shape didn't look right. The edges wavered or blurred. Finally, I caught a clean glimpse when my taillights hit it directly. It was a black sedan from the late 1950s. Chrome bumpers. Boxy frame. Long hood. But the paint looked dull, almost chalky, like it had been scorched. The windows were too dark to see through. And most disturbing of all, there were no license plates. Not front, not back. Just 2 empty slots. I eased off the accelerator, expecting the driver to pass, but the sedan slowed exactly in sync with me without lag, without hesitation. Every adjustment I made, it mirrored perfectly. My pulse picked up. Something was very wrong. At mile marker 64, the sedan suddenly surged forward, coming within 20 feet of my bumper. My whole cab lit up with its headlights. I felt a cold wave wash down my spine. Nobody in their right mind tailgates a semi at night in the middle of the desert. I grabbed the CB again. If you can hear me, back off. Nothing. Only static. But through the radio's crackle, for a single second, I heard something else, a short, metallic scraping sound. Like a bent radio antenna dragging across steel. I checked my right side mirror just as the sedan drifted into the passing lane. It didn't accelerate like a normal car. It floated forward in a slow glide, staying locked in my blind spot for nearly half a minute. My skin crawled. I could feel it beside me somehow, like when someone stands too close even if you're not looking at them. Finally the front of the sedan aligned with the cab of my truck, and I turned to look. The driver's window was rolled down. But there was no one inside. The interior was completely empty. No silhouette. No motion. Just a dark, hollow cabin. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, forcing the truck to climb past 70. The trailer rattled, the engine growled, but the sedan kept perfect pace, gliding effortlessly beside me. Its windows began to frost over from the inside, as if something cold was spreading across the glass. At this point, raw panic took over. I shouted into the radio again, but all that came out was static and that same faint metallic scraping, repeating like a broken signal. The sedan inched forward until it was slightly ahead of me. Then, without warning, it swerved sharply toward my lane. I jerked the wheel to avoid contact. My right tires hit the shoulder, the entire rig shuddered, and I felt the trailer fishtail slightly. When I regained control and looked for the sedan, it had fallen behind again, hovering in the perfect position where I could see it clearly in the mirror. Only now its headlights flickered erratically, like old bulbs struggling to stay lit. The beams pulsed brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again. Every time they dimmed, I thought they would go out entirely. I pressed harder on the gas, desperate to reach the next town. At mile marker 45, the sedan's headlights vanished completely. But the shape of the car was still visible as a darker shade of black moving behind me. No lights, no sound, no engine noise. Just a silent shadow sliding up the highway. Then, without warning, all the electronics in my cab died. Dashboard lights off. GPS off. Radio off. Headlights flickered once but stayed alive, just barely. They dimmed to a sickly yellow glow like they were running on the last drop of battery life. My engine stuttered so violently the entire truck shook. I slammed my hand on the wheel, praying it wouldn't stall. When I looked back at the road, the sedan was gone. Not fading. Not swerving away. Just gone. 1 second it was there, the next the highway behind me was empty for miles. Like it had never been there at all. My dashboard lights flickered back on. The radio crackled once, then returned to normal. GPS reconnected. The engine calmed. Everything returned to normal as quickly as it had died. I drove the next 20 miles in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands ached. When I reached the outskirts of Henderson, I pulled into the first open gas station I could find. The overnight attendant saw my face and immediately asked if I was all right. I told him everything, what I saw, how long it followed me, how it tried to push me off the road. I even described the old black sedan in detail. His expression slowly drained of color. "You're not the first trucker to see that car," he said quietly. "Happens every few years. Same place. Same stretch of highway." I swallowed hard. "What's the story?" He hesitated, then gestured toward the window facing the highway. "Back in '62, a family burned to death in an accident out there. The whole sedan went up in flames. Some folks say the driver fell asleep and hit an embankment. Others say something ran them off the road. But everyone agrees on one thing." He leaned closer. "That sedan never made it to town. And sometimes it still tries." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I had the mechanic check my truck from bumper to bumper. No damage. No scrapes. No signs of electrical failure. But when he stepped down from the cab, he looked uneasy. "You sure nobody rode with you last night?" he asked. There was no one. He pointed at the passenger side mirror. "It's frosted over. On the inside." I left the service shop trembling. I never took Highway 93 at night again. And to this day, whenever I check my mirrors on a long stretch of empty road, I can't shake the fear that I'll see those dim, flickering headlights behind me one more time, creeping closer and closer, waiting to finish the 40 miles it never completed in 1962. The end. Screams from the abandoned bridge. It happened in February 2020, on a remote back road near the foothills of the Appalachians in West Virginia, a place where fog settles so thick at night that even the trees look like silhouettes drowned in smoke. I was hauling construction materials from Charleston to a work site near Summersville. It was past 2 a.m. when I found myself on County Route 17, a narrow, twisting road most truckers avoid after dark. My GPS had rerouted me because of a landslide on the main highway, forcing me onto this older, barely maintained route that led straight through miles of forest and abandoned mining towns. The night was colder than usual, with a sharp wind cutting through the pines. The sky was moonless, and the only light came from my headlights bouncing off the wet asphalt. I hadn't seen another vehicle for almost an hour. Even my radio had gone silent, replaced by a low, static hum that seemed to pulse with every turn of the road. It was on this lonely stretch that I first saw the bridge. Old, narrow, and built from crumbling concrete, it spanned a dried-up riverbed whose rocks had been bleached pale by decades of sun and frost. A rusted warning sign leaned sideways at the entrance, barely readable, weight limit 6 tons. My fully loaded truck weighed several times that, but the GPS insisted this was the only passable route without backtracking 50 miles. I slowed to a crawl, my engine echoing across the empty ravine. As I approached the bridge, fog began sliding up from the riverbed like something alive. It spilled across the asphalt, thick and white, and I had to lean forward in my seat to see anything at all. Then I heard it. A scream. Sharp. High. Childlike. It cut through the fog so suddenly I hit the brakes without thinking. The truck lurched, my trailer groaning behind me. I killed the engine, and in the sudden silence, the scream came again, longer this time, echoing as if bouncing off the walls of the ravine below. It didn't sound animal. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded human. A child. "Help me! Somebody!" I froze. My entire body went cold. The scream came from the direction of the bridge, echoing under the structure, rising up like it was trapped below. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the asphalt. The air was shockingly cold, colder than it had been just moments before. My breath came out in white plumes as I walked toward the bridge rail, shining the light down into the fog-filled ravine. "Hello?" I shouted. The echo returned instantly, but not my voice. The scream returned instead. A desperate, panicked cry. "Help me, please! My pulse pounded in my ears. I scanned the ravine below, but the fog was so thick it swallowed the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't see more than a few feet down. The sound of the screams seemed to come from everywhere at once, behind me, under the bridge, inside the fog itself. I stepped closer until my boots were almost touching the edge of the bridge. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Small ones. Bare feet. A trail of them, faint but unmistakable, starting at the edge of the fog and ending right beside me. They were wet, as if someone had stepped out of the riverbed moments earlier. Each print was clearly shaped, tiny toes, a small heel, the soft curve of an arch. I knelt down and touched one. Ice cold. The scream came again, so loud this time I stumbled backward. I spun around, shining my flashlight across the bridge. The fog lifted slightly, revealing a thin shape standing on the far end of the bridge. A child. A boy, no older than 8, wearing a soaked t-shirt and shorts. His skin was pale as chalk, his arms hanging limply at his sides. His head was lowered, his hair dripping water onto the asphalt. I could see his chest rising and falling as if he had run a long distance. "Sir, please," his voice cracked. "Help me." I stepped forward, heart hammering. "Are you hurt? Where are your parents?" He didn't answer. He just lifted his head slowly. His eyes were empty. White. As if covered in a thin film. Something inside me screamed to run, but my body refused to move. The boy pointed toward the ravine. "They never came for me," he whispered. "I'm still down there." Before I could react, his entire body flickered, like a glitch on an old TV screen, and vanished. Not faded. Not ran. Vanished. The fog swallowed the spot where he had stood. I staggered backward toward my truck, nearly slipping on the wet asphalt. The screams erupted again, this time dozens of them, overlapping, echoing, rising from beneath the bridge in a horrifying chorus. Children's voices. Boys. Girls. Crying. Screaming. Begging. My breathing turned shallow as the fog thickened again around my legs. It felt like hands brushing against me through the cold air. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I sprinted back to the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook so hard I could barely turn the key. The engine roared to life, and I floored it. The bridge groaned under the weight of the truck. For a moment I feared it would collapse entirely, but I kept going, refusing to look in the mirrors. Halfway across, something hit the side of my truck. A small handprint. Then another. Then dozens. Tiny, smeared prints slapping against the windows, the doors, the windshield. I heard muffled cries, desperate pleas, echoing all around me. "Help me. I can't breathe. Don't leave." I shut my eyes tight and kept driving until the bridge disappeared behind me and the fog began to clear. When I finally forced myself to look in the mirrors, the handprints were gone. Every one of them. I drove straight through the night until I reached Somersville at dawn. I parked at a diner and sat there shaking for nearly half an hour before going inside. The waitress noticed immediately. When I told her the story, leaving out nothing, she paled. "That bridge should have been closed decades ago," she said quietly. "Back in '92, a school bus crashed there. Slid right off the bridge into the ravine. The driver survived. The kids didn't." My stomach twisted. "They say the screams never stopped," she continued. "And anyone who goes near after dark hears them." That night, back in my truck, I finally reviewed the dashcam footage. Most of it was useless, the fog made visibility almost zero. But at the exact moment I was on the bridge, the audio spiked. Dozens of overlapping voices distorted the microphone. One voice was clear. A small boy. "Please, take me home." I shut the video and never drove Route 17 again, day or night. And whenever I hear children's laughter now, even innocent, harmless laughter in a grocery store or park, my mind flashes back to that bridge, to the fog, to the handprints appearing across my windshield. And I wonder how many of them are still screaming beneath that old concrete, waiting for someone to finally hear them. The end. The Pale Hitchhiker near Dead Horse Road. It happened in early December of 2018, on a desolate stretch of Highway 191, near Dead Horse Point Road in Utah. The night was brutally cold, the sky moonless, and the air so dry it felt like it could snap. I was hauling specialized equipment to Moab, driving alone through one of the most isolated regions in the entire state. The red rock mesas loomed like dark giants on both sides of the highway, their shapes barely visible in the thin wash of my high beams. It was close to 2:20 a.m. I had been driving nearly 14 hours straight, stopping only once at a small gas station outside Monticello. The roads were empty, the desert silent, the temperature dropping fast enough to fog the inside of my windshield if I breathed too hard. Even the radio had given up, losing all signal after passing the Canyonlands Junction an hour earlier. That was when I saw him. A lone figure standing on the shoulder of the highway, facing the road, illuminated by my headlights from nearly 300 feet away. At first, I thought he might be one of those hikers who misjudged daylight and got stuck outside after sunset. But as I got closer, the shape of his body became clearer, and my stomach tightened. He was tall, over 6 feet, and painfully thin, wearing only a faded t-shirt and jeans despite the freezing cold. His skin looked unnaturally pale, almost bluish, like someone who had been outside for hours. His arms hung stiffly at his sides. His hair was messy and matted. And though his face was downcast, I could feel his eyes following my truck as I approached. I slowed automatically. Something about him demanded it. When I rolled closer, he stepped into the beam of my headlights and raised one arm, not waving or frantically signaling, just extending an index finger and pointing up the road. A slow, precise gesture. I rolled down my window just a crack. The desert wind cut through instantly, freezing my cheek. "You all right?" I asked. He didn't answer. But he looked up. His eyes were the first thing that made my blood run cold. They were gray. Not light gray, void gray. Cloudy. Dull. Dead-looking. But behind them was something else, desperation. He opened his mouth like he was trying to speak, but the words came out in a rasp, barely audible over the wind. "Please, take me." "To where?" I asked, leaning closer despite the knot in my gut. He turned slowly and pointed again, not wildly or confusedly, but very specifically, toward Dead Horse Point Road, a thin, winding path that led deep into the desert cliffs. A place known for fatal drops and narrow ledges. My headlights flickered as if reacting to something. The truck engine growled with a strange, uneven rhythm. The man took one step closer. "They left me there," he whispered. "I need to go back." Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. No stranded hiker would ask to return to the place they were left. No injured man would be this calm. And no living human should have eyes that looked like they belonged in a morgue. But before I could think of an excuse, he walked to the passenger door and opened it. I never heard the latch click. I never saw him pull the handle. The door just opened. He climbed in without hesitation, moving with slow, robotic stiffness. When he sat down, the air inside the cab dropped instantly, a sharp, biting cold that made my breath visible. He folded his hands in his lap and stared forward. "Drive," he whispered. My hands were trembling as I put the truck in gear. I should have refused. I should have kicked him out. But something about him, about the certainty in his voice, kept me silent. We drove for several minutes without a sound except the engine straining out minor inclines. The desert stretched endlessly around us, black and empty. The man didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't shiver despite the cold that radiated from him like frost from a freezer door. At mile marker 17, he lifted his hand and pointed toward the turnoff. "Here. Dead Horse Road." I hesitated. The road was narrow, uneven, and barely wide enough for a truck. But his whisper came again, sharper, more urgent. "Here." I turned. The gravel crunched under my tires. The headlights illuminated twisted juniper trees and pale sandstone. The road dipped suddenly, and the man pressed one palm against the dashboard as if sensing something ahead. "They didn't mean to leave me," he whispered. "What happened?" I asked. He stared straight ahead. "We slid." "Who?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then, my brother. And me." My throat tightened. "When?" He swallowed slowly, a chilling sound in the silence. "Yesterday." But the way he said it felt wrong. Empty. Like he was repeating someone else's memory. We continued deeper into the desert until the road widened enough for me to stop. The man slowly lifted his arm again and pointed toward a dark patch of land ahead. "There." My headlights revealed a broken guardrail, twisted inward like something had crashed through it. Beyond it, a steep drop. A cold gust of air rushed through the cabin as if the desert itself was exhaling. The man turned to look at me for the first time since he'd climbed in. His expression was sorrowful. "Lost." "He survived," he whispered. "I didn't." The words hit me so hard I felt my chest seize. I stared at him, really stared, and saw what I should have noticed sooner. The pale blue under his skin wasn't from cold. The stiffness in his limbs wasn't exhaustion. The clouded eyes weren't trauma. He wasn't alive. Before I could react, his body started to fade, not dissolve, not break apart, but lose its solidity like smoke thinning in sunlight. "I just wanted someone to find me," he said, voice trembling. "So he won't think he left me alone." A faint flicker passed through him, then another. His hands became transparent. His chest blurry. His face drained into mist. In the final second before he vanished completely, he whispered, "Thank you." Then he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. But the air remained freezing. Shaking, I stepped out of the truck and approached the broken guardrail. The beam of my flashlight revealed something at the bottom of the ravine, a crumpled pickup truck lying on its side, half buried in sand and brush. I scrambled back up the embankment and called the sheriff. Rescue teams arrived within 40 minutes. By dawn, they had pulled one survivor from the wreckage, a young man barely conscious, suffering from dehydration and shock. His brother, they found 20 feet away. Dead. Frozen. The deputy later told me the body looked like it had been there for days, not hours. The cold didn't match the timeline. Neither did the condition of the skin. But they didn't question how I knew the crash was there. They couldn't. Because at that very moment, one of the rescuers climbed up the slope holding something he'd found near the shattered truck door. A damp t-shirt. The same t-shirt the hitchhiker had been wearing. I left Utah that morning with a shaking voice, a tight chest, and a coldness in my bones that didn't leave for weeks. And every time I pass a deserted road now, especially at night, I check the passenger seat, afraid that I might see him sitting there again, waiting to be taken home. The end. The invisible passenger in my back seat. It happened in late August of 2020, on Highway 2, in northern Montana, a long, unforgiving stretch of road locals call the High Line. It was close to 3:10 a.m., and the sky was so dark it felt like the stars had been scraped away. I was hauling livestock feed to a ranch outside Havre, driving through miles of empty plains and low hills, with nothing but my headlights cutting through the darkness. The air was warm but strangely still, the kind of stillness that makes even the sound of your own engine feel too loud. I had been on the road since sunset and was fighting the kind of exhaustion that makes every shadow look like a threat. This part of Highway 2 is almost no services, no towns, no lights, just endless asphalt and the occasional rusted mailbox belonging to someone who lives miles off the grid. I hadn't seen a single vehicle since Shelby, almost 2 hours behind me. My radio had long slipped into static, and even my CB had gone silent. The isolation was thick enough to feel physical. And then it happened. I heard the rear passenger side door click open. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a soft, perfectly clear click, followed by a faint creak, as if someone had pulled the door open and slid inside. I slammed the brakes so hard the entire truck shuddered. My heart punched against my ribs as I twisted around in my seat. No one was there. The back seat was empty. The door was closed. For a moment I told myself I imagined it, that fatigue was playing tricks on my ears. But as I sat there with my hazard lights blinking, the cab suddenly grew colder. Not cold like the AC kicked in. Cold like someone had opened a freezer door behind me. My breath fogged faintly in front of me despite the warm August night. I turned the heater up instinctively, but the temperature didn't change. After a minute, I forced myself to start driving again. Maybe if I kept moving, the feeling would fade. Maybe the cold was just nerves. But then I heard it. A soft exhale behind me. Not wind. Not engine noise. A breath. Human. Slow and shaky, as if someone was sitting in the back seat trying to warm themselves. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as I looked at the rearview mirror. The back seat was still empty. But the indentation on the seat cushion wasn't. Someone, was sitting there. The shape was clear as day, a deep curve in the seat, pressed down by weight. A human weight. I stared at it until my hands began trembling on the wheel. I finally forced myself to ask aloud, "Who's back there?" Silence. Just the rumbling of the engine and the faint whistle of wind outside. I tried again, voice cracking. "Do you need help?" The indentation deepened, as if whoever, or whatever, was back there leaned forward slightly. My blood turned cold. Then I heard a voice. Not loud. Not angry. Just a quiet whisper from right behind my right shoulder. "Don't leave me out here." Every muscle in my body seized. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The voice wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't imagined. It was too clear, too close, too real. I swallowed, struggling to keep my voice steady. What happened to you?" The whisper came again, slightly louder. I didn't see her coming. I froze. My heart hammered. I didn't know what to say, so I waited, hoping the voice would continue. The cab felt like a sealed box filled with cold air, like I was trapped inside a walk-in freezer. Finally, after nearly a minute of silence, the voice returned. "She ran into the road." I swerved. The passenger seat indentation shifted again, pressing deeper, then slowly rising as though the presence was adjusting its posture. And I went down the embankment. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs hard enough to hurt. The story, the cold air, the invisible weight, it all aligned into something terrible. "You crashed?" I whispered. A long pause. Then, yes. I forced myself to ask, though part of me didn't want the answer. "When?" The temperature in the cab dropped so suddenly my breath fogged again. "A long time ago." That was all. No year. No details. Just those words, spoken with a sadness that made my chest tighten. We drove in silence for several minutes. The road stretched endlessly ahead. I kept glancing at the mirrors, hoping the indentation would fade, hoping whatever was in my back seat would leave, but it stayed there. Quiet. Heavy. Present. At mile marker 224, the whisper came again. "Stop here." I didn't want to, but my hands automatically slowed the truck. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder beside a wide ditch leading down into a shadowy field. "Why here?" I asked. "This is where I left," the voice murmured. I shut off the engine, and the silence swallowed the cab. The cold was suffocating now, a thick blanket settling over everything. The indentation in the seat slowly lifted, as if the invisible passenger was rising. I didn't breathe. For nearly 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the rear door clicked open. I heard the hinges groan. Felt a rush of freezing wind fill the cab. And though I couldn't see anyone step out, the door stayed open for several long, terrifying seconds, as if someone were standing there beside the road. Then the whisper came from outside the truck. Thank you for the ride." The door gently closed on its own. The coldness immediately began to fade. I sat frozen for minutes, unable to move. When I finally forced myself out of the truck, flashlight in hand, I walked toward the ditch. My beam landed on something that made my legs weaken. A rusted, overturned sedan sitting at the bottom of the embankment, almost swallowed by tall grass. The metal was sun-bleached and twisted. The windshield was shattered inward. The driver's door hung open, crushed against a tree trunk. The car had been there a long time. Too long. I stumbled backward and called the county sheriff. It took them nearly 40 minutes to reach me. When they did, the deputy climbed down into the ditch and inspected the wreck. A moment later, he called me over. Inside the rusted frame were the remains of a man, barely identifiable, sunken into the earth, clothes decayed, jaw fractured. He had been there for years. The sheriff looked shaken. "We've had missing person reports going back 15 years, he said quietly. "This might be one of them." I didn't tell him about the invisible passenger. I didn't tell him about the whispers or the cold or the indentation in the seat. But as I walked back to my truck, the deputy called out, holding something he'd found near the driver's side door. It was a cracked keychain. A small plastic tag. The letters were faded, but still readable. HI line truck stop. Return if found. The same truck stop I'd passed hours before. I didn't go back there. I didn't tell anyone. But for weeks afterward, every time I got into my truck, I checked the back seat before starting the engine. And every night alone on an empty highway, I kept hearing that same whisper. "Don't leave me out here." The end. The highway patrol officer who was already dead. It happened on a frigid night in January 2022 along Highway 50 in Nevada, a stretch of road known as the loneliest road in America. I was transporting heavy machinery parts east toward Ely, driving through endless desert plains with nothing but sagebrush, distant mountains, and pitch-black sky. It was around 1:40 a.m. when the temperature dropped sharply, reaching below freezing. My windshield kept fogging from the inside, and even the heater struggled to keep the cab warm. Highway 50 at night feels like a different world, no lights, no towns, nothing but the faint glow of your own headlights. I hadn't passed a single car for nearly an hour. My CB was silent. The radio lost all signal after Fallon. I remember thinking how overwhelmingly empty the world felt. Then I saw the flash of red and blue lights in my mirror. A patrol car. At first, relief washed over me. The presence of another human being after hours of isolation felt comforting. I slowed slightly, expecting the cruiser to pass, but instead the lights remained steady behind me. After almost a minute, the siren chirped once, short, sharp. I pulled onto the shoulder. The cruiser stopped behind me, lights still flashing. The desert wind howled across the asphalt as I lowered my window. The cold cut through the cab like a blade. The patrol officer approached slowly, illuminated in alternating washes of red and blue. He looked tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the standard Nevada Highway Patrol uniform, thick winter jacket, beige hat, reflective patches. But something was strange. His movements felt stiff, mechanical, like someone who had been standing in the cold far too long. He stopped at my door. "Evening," he said. His voice was low, flat, almost drained. "Evening, officer," I replied. "Everything all right?" He scanned my cab with empty, unmoving eyes before speaking again. "You were drifting between lanes," he said. "Long night?" "I've been on the road since late afternoon," I admitted. "But I'm alert." He nodded slowly, the movement barely noticeable. "Step out of the truck, please." The request made my stomach tighten. I hadn't been speeding. I hadn't swerved. I hadn't done anything wrong. But I did as I was told. The cold hit me instantly, burning my cheeks. The officer stood perfectly still as I stepped onto the asphalt. "Walk in a straight line for me," he said. I complied. My breath came out as white mist in the freezing air. When I turned back toward him, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, something between exhaustion and sorrow. "You're fine," he said finally. "Get back inside. Drive safe." I thanked him and climbed back into the cab. As I settled into the seat, I glanced at my side mirror to watch him return to his cruiser. He wasn't there. Not behind my truck. Not beside it. Nowhere on the shoulder. The desert was empty. My heart began to hammer. For a moment I thought maybe he had stepped behind my trailer, out of view. But the flashing lights behind me were gone too. Completely gone. I twisted around, looking directly out the rear window of the cab. There was no cruiser. No lights. Nothing. The shoulder was empty from horizon to horizon. A chill crawled from my neck down my spine. I grabbed the door handle, ready to step back out and check the road, but the moment my hand touched the metal, the interior of the cab grew colder, unnaturally cold. I froze. Something was wrong. The cold felt identical to the moment the officer first approached. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the shoulder as fast as I safely could. For the next several minutes, I kept checking all mirrors, convinced the patrol car would reappear. But the road remained empty. Then, 5 miles later, my radio crackled to life. Not music. Not static. A voice. Broken. Distorted. "Stop." I grabbed the CB mic. "Who's calling?" "Say again?" "Stop, please." I dropped the mic. The voice didn't sound like a typical transmission. It sounded like someone talking through water. Someone far away. Someone desperate. My hands trembled as I turned the CB completely off. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, but the sense of being watched followed me like a shadow. 30 minutes later, I pulled into a rest area, one of the few along that desolate road. I parked near the lights, stepped out, and hurried into the restroom just to splash cold water on my face. A man came in behind me, an older trucker with a white beard and a cap reading Ely Freight. He nodded politely, then paused when he saw my expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I forced a weak laugh. "Something like that. Got stopped by a patrol officer back there. Strange guy. Didn't even check my license. Just looked at me." The older trucker's face changed instantly. His expression tightened. "Where exactly?" he asked. "About 10 miles west of here." He exhaled slowly and shook his head. "That wasn't a real officer." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward slightly. 3 years ago, a highway patrol officer died on that stretch. Single vehicle accident. They say he fell asleep at the wheel on a late shift. His cruiser rolled into a ditch, flipped, and caught fire. Other drivers saw the flames from the highway, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. Burned beyond recognition. My stomach sank. The strangest part, he continued, is that for months after the crash, truckers reported seeing a patrol car pulling them over in the exact area he died. Same description every time: quiet officer, stiff movements, flat tone of voice. I swallowed hard. "And what did he do?" "Checked if they were tired," the man said. "Told them to drive safe. Just like he was doing on the night he died." My mouth went dry. "He was working double shifts back then," the man added. "Trying to keep drivers safe from drifting off. Ironically, exhaustion killed him." I felt lightheaded. "So what I saw was..." "Some say he's still out there," the man said softly. "Watching the highway he never finished patrolling." I stepped outside into the cold desert air, feeling my heart beating too fast. I returned to my truck, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the empty passenger seat. When I finally restarted the engine, my dashboard lights flickered twice, exactly the way they had when he approached the first time. A soft whisper crackled through my radio, not words, just breath. Then silence. I drove the rest of the night in complete terror, never dropping below the speed limit, never drifting, never letting fatigue win. Because every time my eyelids grew heavy, I remembered that officer's dull, lifeless eyes staring at me in the dark, and I feared that if I didn't stay awake, he might return. Not to warn me, but to make sure I didn't end up like him. The end. The repeating radio transmission. It happened in late March of 2021, on Interstate 70, in eastern Colorado, a flat, windswept stretch of highway where the land rolls out into miles of empty prairie. It was close to 3:30 a.m., the hour when the world feels half asleep and even the strongest headlights can't push back the darkness. I was hauling grain east toward Kansas City, driving alone as usual, fighting through a night that had already felt unnervingly quiet. The sky was heavy with low clouds, and the wind kept slicing across the highway hard enough to rock the trailer. I had passed Limon nearly 40 minutes earlier and hadn't seen another vehicle since. The interstate was a long, straight line fading endlessly into black. The radio had been nothing but static for the past hour, and the CB, usually buzzing with the voices of other long haulers, was completely silent. I remember thinking how lonely the world felt, how exposed the plains seemed, as if there was nowhere to hide from the night. Then, at exactly 3:37 a.m., my radio crackled. Not static. Not interference. A voice. Broken. Strained. Hushed by noise. This is Truck 17, anyone copy, brakes failed. I froze. My hands tightened on the wheel. The voice was faint, wrapped in distortion, like someone speaking through a damaged speaker from far away. If anyone hears, I can't stop. The transmission cut suddenly. Static returned. I leaned forward, staring at the radio. Truck 17. I didn't recognize the call sign, but the fear in the voice was unmistakable. Real. Immediate. I grabbed the CB mic. Truck 17, this is eastbound on I-70, about 50 miles past Limon. Do you copy? What's your location? Only static answered. I switched channels, trying again. Truck 17, repeat, do you copy? Static. Then the voice returned. Slightly louder this time. Truck 17, heading eastbound, can't slow down. God, please, anyone. The last word broke apart into garbled sound. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. A runaway truck was every driver's nightmare, especially in the dark on a lonely road. I checked my mirrors, scanning for headlights, but the interstate behind me was a dead void. No trucks. No cars. Nothing. I pressed the mic again. Truck 17, what's your last mile marker? The radio hissed, then repeated the exact same message. Word for word. This is Truck 17, anyone copy, brakes failed. A shiver crawled up my spine. This wasn't a response, it was the same message I heard the first time. The same pauses. The same pattern of static. Not similar. Identical. I replayed it in my mind, matching each word. It wasn't a real-time transmission. It was a recording. Or something repeating itself. I switched through every CB channel, but they were dead. Completely dead. Only my radio carried that broken voice, rising out of the static like a ghost. The message repeated again. Truck 17, heading eastbound, can't slow down. I whispered to myself, this can't be real. But it was. The voice was too full of fear to be faked. Too human. Too alive. I forced myself to keep driving, though every instinct told me to pull over. The prairie stretched endlessly around me, cold and dark. The clouds drifted low over the highway like a ceiling pressing downward. At 3:44 a.m., the transmission changed. The voice came in clearer, much clearer. Anybody, please, brakes are gone. I'm doing 80, can't hold it. There was a loud metallic screech in the background, the unmistakable grind of steel and asphalt. The way a trailer sounds when it fishtails out of control. Then a deep, hollow thud. Then silence. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. I keyed the mic again. Truck 17, do you copy? What's your location? No answer. The interstate ahead of me stretched into darkness. Wind howled across the plains, brushing against my cab like cold fingers. Then the radio hissed again. Truck 17, brakes failed, if anyone hears. The same message. Repeating. Looping. My chest tightened. Something was horribly wrong. At 3:51 a.m., just as the recording began its cycle again, a set of faint lights appeared far ahead, hazard lights, blinking weakly in the dark. I slowed down, heart pounding harder with each mile. As I approached, the shape became clearer. A semi. Or what remained of one. The trailer was folded like a crushed can, steel twisted violently against the guardrail. The cab had plowed into a concrete embankment, shattered almost beyond recognition. Debris littered the shoulder. Tire marks streaked across the asphalt in long, black scars. I pulled onto the shoulder and jumped out of the truck, cold wind hitting me like a slap. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The crushed cab was burned and rusted. Rotting. Not fresh. Not recent. Old. So old that the paint had peeled away. So old that the rubber on the tires had cracked. So old that vines and weeds had grown around the wreck, pushing through the metal. I felt sick. This wreck had been here a long time. Years. Not hours. Not days. Years. My radio crackled again, louder now, almost screaming into the night. This is Truck 17, anyone copy, brakes failed. I staggered back from the wreckage. At the base of the destroyed cab door, half buried in dirt and dead weeds, was a license plate. TRK 17. My blood turned to ice. A gust of cold wind swept across the plain, carrying a faint metallic smell, like burning rubber and hot steel. I lifted my flashlight higher. The driver's side window was shattered. Inside was nothing but an old, rusted frame of a seat and a steering column crushed inward. No body. No remains. Just silence. Then the radio screamed again. Heading eastbound, can't slow down. Clearer this time. Closer. As if the voice wasn't coming from the radio, but from right behind me. I spun around, breath frozen in my throat. Nothing. Only the endless highway. The empty plains. The wind. I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from the wreck. My radio crackled again, but this time the voice whispered, quiet, desperate, trembling. Please, someone, don't let me crash again. I ran back to my truck and jumped inside, slamming the door. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The radio hissed one final time, and the voice came through so clearly it sounded like it was in the cab with me. Help me. I floored the gas, pulling away from the wreck as fast as the truck could handle. My headlights cut a narrow path through the dark, and I didn't look back. Not once. The transmission continued to repeat behind me, fading slowly into static as I drove east, until it disappeared completely with a faint, dying click. When I reached Kansas City hours later, I told a trooper at the way station what I'd heard. He listened quietly, then nodded without surprise. That's the old Truck 17 crash, he said. Happened in '07. Driver lost his brakes. Radioed for help. No one picked up until after he'd already gone off the road. I stared at him, unable to form words. He continued, You're not the first to hear the call. But you're the first this year. That night, when I climbed into my truck to sleep, the cabin was silent. Peaceful. Normal. Until I turned off the lights. And heard a faint whisper from the radio, one single word, almost lost between breaths. Please. I unplugged the radio entirely. But sometimes, on long stretches of empty highway, I still hear the echo in my mind. Brakes failed, brakes failed. And I wonder if Truck 17 is still out there, repeating the last moments of its driver's life, trapped in a loop he can't escape. The end. The Phantom Girl in the Red Hoodie. It happened in early September of 2019, on Highway 101, near the Oregon coast, just south of Tillamook. The night was wet, cold, and heavy with ocean fog rolling in so thick it felt like driving through milk. It was around 2:50 a.m., the hour when the world is silent except for the distant crash of waves you can't see and the hum of your own engine. I was hauling fresh produce north toward Astoria, following my usual night route along the coastline. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours with only one short break in Newport, and the exhaustion was starting to weigh on me. Highway 101 is eerie at night. The fog swallows the road, the cliffs drop off into darkness, and the forest crowds close around the asphalt like it's closing in. My headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead. Even the reflective markers on the road looked distorted in the moisture. I kept my speed low, knowing how quickly wildlife, or worse, a sudden turn, could catch a tired driver off guard. It was near mile marker 78 when everything started. Out of the fog, maybe 30 yards ahead, I saw a small shape dart across the road. So fast I almost missed it. A small figure, child-sized, wearing a bright red hoodie. I slammed the brakes. The trailer groaned behind me, tires squealing on the wet pavement. My heart jolted into my throat. I expected to feel impact. To hear something. To see a shadow fall under the headlights. But nothing. The fog drifted past like nothing had been there at all. I leaned forward, staring into the swirling mist. My hands shook slightly on the wheel. I waited for movement, for any sign of a child running to the other side of the road. But the fog was empty. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The air hit me like a cold slap, filled with salt and moisture. The only sound was the distant ocean grinding against rocks. "Hello?" I called out. My voice disappeared into the fog. I walked along the shoulder, shining the beam across the asphalt. No footprints. No rustling in the bushes. No sound of someone breathing or crying. Nothing. But the image of that red hoodie stuck in my mind. Bright. Distinct. Not something I could confuse with a deer or a trick of the lights. I was about to step back into the truck when I noticed something on the hood. A small, smeared handprint. Fresh. Wet. Tiny. As if a child had placed their hand on my truck just seconds earlier. Cold sweat rolled down my neck. I scanned the road again, suddenly feeling exposed, like someone was watching me from the darkness. I forced myself into the cab, locked the doors, and took a long breath before pulling back onto the road. I told myself the handprint could have been from the fog, condensation, anything. But deep down I knew better. It was too perfect. Too deliberate. 10 minutes later, as I drove deeper into the coastal forest, the fog thickened even more. The world shrank to a small tunnel of dim yellow light in front of me. I kept checking the mirrors, trying to stay alert, when something moved in the corner of my vision. The right side mirror showed a flash of red. Just a blur. Gone in an instant. I jerked the wheel slightly before correcting, my pulse hammering. I leaned toward the window, staring out into the darkness. The only thing visible was the twisted silhouettes of pines shifting in the breeze. Then I heard it. A soft thump against the side of the cab. Light. Almost gentle. Like a small fist knocking. I froze. My breath hitched. Thump. Another one. Thump. 3 slow knocks. Right behind the passenger side door. I forced myself to keep driving. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the wheel. I refused to look at the mirror again, afraid of what I might see. But my peripheral vision caught something anyway. A shape. Small. Sitting in the passenger seat. I snapped my head to the right. The seat was empty. But the outline of a small body, a faint depression, pressed into the fabric. Like someone invisible was sitting there. Small legs dangling just a few inches above the floor. A slight shift in weight. The seat moved. I felt the cold seep into my bones. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." A faint drip sound began. Tap. 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 I looked up. A small wet handprint spread across the inside of the windshield. Then another. Then 3 more, forming a trail of tiny, watery marks as if someone were crawling across the glass from the passenger side toward the driver's side. Tap. Another handprint appeared. Closer this time. My throat tightened. I wiped my palm across the windshield, but the prints didn't smear. They didn't fade. They stayed sharp, defined, like they had been pressed from the inside by real skin. The seat beside me shifted again, sinking deeper under invisible weight. I couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, ever so slowly, a voice whispered. Female. Childlike. Right beside my ear. Why didn't you stop the first time? I swerved, heart exploding in my chest. I almost took the truck off the road before I corrected violently, breathing in ragged gasps. Tears blurred my vision. I'd never felt terror so raw, so immediate. The voice returned. Soft. Sad. You didn't see me. I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Every muscle in my body was locked tight. A long silence followed. Then, faintly. I always run. I always fall. No one ever sees me. My vision tunneled. I forced myself to breathe. Forced myself to look forward. The fog suddenly cleared ahead, revealing a stretch of road illuminated by the reflection of my headlights. Something glinted on the asphalt. A memorial cross. White. Weathered. Decorated with a single plastic red rose. And a child-sized red hoodie hanging from it, torn and faded by rain. The handprints on the windshield began to fade. Slowly. One by one. The seat beside me rose, the indentation disappearing. The cold lifted. And for the first time since I'd seen her, the night felt empty again. When I reached Astoria near dawn, I parked at the depot and sat in the cab for nearly 20 minutes, refusing to move. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My heart still hammered painfully. When one of the workers approached to unload the trailer, he immediately noticed something on my truck. Hey, he said, pointing. What's this? On the hood of the truck, glistening with early morning dew, was a small wet handprint. Too small to belong to anyone older than 8. I asked a local dispatcher about the memorial. His face fell when he heard my description. That cross? That's for a girl who died in 2014. Hit by a truck during a fog bank. Driver swore he never saw her. Folks around here say she still runs across the road when the fog gets thick. Later that day, before leaving town, I passed the memorial again in daylight. The red hoodie was gone. And I will never forget the whispering voice that followed me down Highway 101 that night, still echoing in the back of my mind. You didn't see me. The end. The truck stop restroom door that wouldn't let me out. It happened in November of 2020 at an old, half-forgotten rest stop off Highway 287 in northern Wyoming, about 40 miles south of the Montana border. The night was brutally cold, the kind of cold that freezes the inside of your nose and turns your breath into mist even before it leaves your mouth. I had been driving since early afternoon, hauling steel fittings toward Billings. By the time I reached the state line, it was after 1:10 a.m., and exhaustion had already started to blur the edges of my vision. That part of Highway 287 is endless, just open plains stretching into blackness, broken only by occasional ranches with a single porch light glowing far in the distance. When I finally saw the faint yellow glow of an old rest stop ahead, it felt like salvation. It wasn't one of the modern ones with bright lights and vending machines, it was the kind that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A low concrete building, 2 dim bulbs flickering above the entrances, and an empty parking lot cracked with frost. I pulled in, shut down the engine, and stepped out into the freezing air. The wind cut sideways across the plain, making the entire structure groan faintly. The door to the men's restroom creaked when I opened it, the stale smell of old tile and cold air hitting me immediately. One flickering fluorescent light illuminated the long, narrow interior. The mirror was cracked. A rusted heating vent clunked sporadically against the wall. Everything about the place felt abandoned. I walked toward the last stall, the only one with a functioning door, and finished quickly, eager to get back on the road. When I stepped out to wash my hands, the motion-detecting light above the sinks flickered twice, then buzzed loudly. It dimmed so low I could barely see my reflection. As I dried my hands on my jeans, I heard something behind me. A soft tap. Like fingertips brushing the metal of a stall door. I turned. There was no one else in the restroom. The temperature dropped sharply, as if someone had opened a freezer. My breath fogged in the air. I reached for the main door and pushed it open. Or tried to. It didn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. I slammed my shoulder into it, but it felt like someone was holding it shut from the outside, bracing themselves with their entire weight. I twisted the handle. It moved freely, but the door would not open. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the tile. "Is someone out there?" No answer. A sudden, sharp knock came from directly behind me. I spun around. The stall door rattled violently on its hinges. I froze, staring at it. The metal shook harder, slamming against the divider, as if something inside was trying to burst out. My pulse pounded in my ears. I backed toward the entrance door, gripping the handle, pulling with everything I had. It refused to move. "Who's in there?" I shouted, though fear tightened my throat. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then a single, soft sound drifted from the last stall. A rope creaking. A slow, rhythmic sway. My chest tightened painfully. I stepped back toward the sinks, heart hammering. The air had grown so cold that frost formed on the cracked mirror. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dimness, and landed on the floor beneath the last stall. A pair of shoes. Old, worn work boots. They didn't move. I swallowed hard and took one slow step forward. Something deep inside told me to leave, to break the window or scream until someone heard me, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, drawn toward the stall by something I couldn't explain. "Sir?" My voice cracked. "Do you need help?" No answer. I crouched slightly, shining the light under the stall door. My blood turned to ice. The boots weren't touching the floor. They hung suspended a few inches above it. Swinging slightly. Back and forth. Back and forth. A rope creaked above them. I stumbled backward, slamming into the opposite wall. My breath caught, panic clawing at my lungs. The temperature had fallen to the point where my fingers stung from the cold. The lights flickered violently. Then they went out. Total darkness. My flashlight buzzed with static on the speaker, then began to dim, as if something were draining the battery. In the flickering beam, the boots swayed again. Back and forth. Then a voice, low, ragged, barely more than a breath, echoed through the restroom. "Why, did you come in here?" My knees nearly buckled. The boots stopped swinging. The rope creaked once more. Then the stall door slowly began to open. The hinges groaned. Inch by inch. My flashlight flickered again, weaker this time. I backed toward the main exit, nearly slipping on the tile. The stall door creaked wider. A shadow filled the gap, long, thin, unmoving. "Let me out," the voice whispered. I screamed, ramming my shoulder into the main door with everything I had. It didn't move. I kicked it. Punched it. Slammed against it. Nothing. Behind me, the stall door clicked fully open. My flashlight died. I was blind. Then something icy cold brushed the back of my neck. I spun, flailing wildly in the dark, my breath coming in broken gasps. Another whisper, closer this time, floated through the room. "They locked me in here, just like you." I slammed my body against the door again, sobbing, desperate, terrified. This time it moved. Just an inch. I shoved harder. The gap widened. A blast of freezing wind hit me from behind, followed by a cold pressure wrapping around my shoulder, gripping tight, holding me back. "No," I cried. "Let go." The pressure squeezed harder. My fingers dug into the metal frame of the door. I pulled with every ounce of strength I had, the muscles in my arms burning. Then, suddenly, release. The pressure vanished. The door flew open, and I stumbled out onto the icy pavement. I turned and slammed it shut behind me, breathing in sharp, painful gulps of cold air. The rest stop was silent again. No lights. No sound. No movement. When I tried to pull the restroom door open from the outside, it swung freely. It hadn't been locked at all. Hands shaking violently, I ran to my truck and sped out of that rest stop as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I reached Billings at dawn. Hours later, still shaken, I mentioned the experience to the woman working the front desk at the freight depot. Her face drained of color immediately. "That rest stop," she said quietly. "No one's supposed to use it. It was shut down 5 years ago." "Why?" I asked, barely able to form the word. She hesitated, eyes full of dread. "A maintenance worker hanged himself in the restroom. They found him in the last stall. People kept hearing things in there for months after." She looked at me, voice trembling. "They locked the doors permanently. Or, they were supposed to. I never used an old, isolated rest stop again. And every time I pass Highway 287 at night, I feel the cold breath of that voice behind me. Let me out." The end. The woman crying under the overpass. It happened in late October of 2018, on Interstate 35, just north of Austin, Texas. It was close to 2:30 a.m., the kind of hour when the world feels empty and stretched thin. I was hauling a flatbed load of lumber toward Waco, having left San Antonio just before midnight. The night was unusually humid, with thick, low fog drifting across the highway, making the overpasses look like dark stone giants looming overhead. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours, and my shoulders were tight, my eyes burning from staring into the sheen of fog reflecting my headlights. The interstate was nearly deserted, just long ribbons of concrete disappearing into blackness. Even the usual glow of distant city lights seemed muted. My radio had been silent for almost an hour, and the CB only crackled occasionally with faint static. I had my windows cracked open to stay alert, letting in the damp night air. By the time I reached the Old County overpass near mile marker 277, the fog thickened so suddenly it felt like driving into a curtain. I slowed to 50, leaning forward in my seat, scanning the shoulder for any movement. That was when I heard it. Crying. Soft. Muffled. But unmistakable. A woman's sobs drifting through the fog from somewhere under the overpass. I eased off the gas, heart thudding. The sound rose and fell with painful clarity, raw and desperate. It was the kind of crying you don't mistake for anything else, not wind, not animals, not imagination. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing weakly through the haze. The crying continued, closer now, echoing faintly off the concrete walls beneath the road above. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down from the cab. The air beneath the overpass was colder, almost unnaturally so. My breath fogged in front of me as I approached the shadowy space between the massive concrete pillars. The sobbing grew louder. "Ma'am?" I called. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" No answer. Just more crying. I followed the sound beneath the overpass. My flashlight beam cut through the thick fog, illuminating cracked pavement, scattered trash, old tire marks. Then, in the far shadow under the center beam, I saw her. A woman. Sitting on the ground, hunched over, hugging her knees. Her hair was long and dark, dripping with moisture from the fog. She wore a light dress, far too thin for the cold, and her shoulders shook with each sob. Her bare feet were pressed against the concrete, covered in grime. I slowed my steps. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Are you hurt? She didn't look up. Her hands covered her face. Her body trembled violently. I took another step. I can call someone, an ambulance, the police, just tell me what happened. Slowly, she lowered her hands. But she didn't look at me. She stared at something behind me. Her eyes widened in terror. I froze. What is it? I whispered, not daring to turn. Her lips trembled. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. He left him alone, she whispered. Don't leave him alone. A chill spread through my body. Who? I asked. Who are you talking about? She looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were clouded, almost gray, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her voice cracked. My son. My throat tightened. Where is he? She lifted a shaking hand and pointed deeper into the darkness beneath the overpass. I raised my flashlight and followed her gesture. The beam illuminated deeper shadows, broken bottles, old debris. Then I saw it. A small object lying on the concrete near one of the far pillars. A child's toy. A small stuffed bear, dirty and partially crushed. I felt my stomach twist. I stepped closer and crouched down, lifting the toy gently. One of its button eyes was missing. The fabric was torn on the side. It looked like it had been lying there for years. When I turned back toward the woman, she was standing now. Upright. Still. Silent. Her expression had changed completely. Not sad. Not terrified. Empty. Her face was blank, drained of emotion. Her dress hung motionless against her cold, pale skin. Her hair dripped, but the droplets never hit the ground, they simply vanished into the fog. I backed up a step. Where's your son? I whispered. She blinked slowly. He's still here, she said. He never left. A sudden gust of cold air swept beneath the overpass, swirling the fog around us. The sobbing returned, but it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from deeper in the shadows. Soft. Childlike. I turned slowly toward the sound. A small shape sat near the far pillar. Too small to be an adult. Knees pressed to the chest. Head lowered. Crying. Hey, I whispered. Are you? The shape dissolved into fog before I could finish. Vanished. Not ran. Not faded. Vanished. The crying echoed again, behind me now. I spun around. The woman was gone. The fog swallowed the space where she'd been standing. Only the faint echo of her sob remained, mixed with the child's. My flashlight flickered violently, then went out. A breath of cold air swept past my ear. A whisper. Don't leave him alone. I sprinted back toward my truck, stumbling in the dark. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I reached the cab, slammed the door, locked it, and fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the fog. As I pulled back onto the highway, I checked my mirrors. Under the overpass, illuminated faintly by my taillights through the fog, I saw two shapes. A woman. And a small child. Holding hands. Watching me leave. I didn't slow down for 20 miles. When I finally reached a truck stop outside Waco, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat in the cab, breathing hard, replaying the scene. The crying. The woman's empty eyes. The child who appeared and vanished in moments. At dawn, I asked an older local trucker about that overpass. When I described the location, his face darkened. That place, he said quietly. You shouldn't stop there. Not ever. Why? I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. Back in 2003, a woman and her young son died under that overpass. Car broke down at night. They tried to walk for help. A drunk driver hit them. Killed them both. Driver fled and wasn't found for days. He rubbed his forehead. Locals say she still cries for her boy down there. And some drivers swear they hear the kid too. I swallowed, cold dread filling my chest. They say she looks for anyone who'll listen, he said. Anyone who might bring him home. When I left the truck stop later that morning, the fog was finally lifting. But as I passed the old overpass on my way north again, my hands tensed on the wheel. Because beneath the concrete shadows, just before the fog thinned entirely, I saw the faint shape of a small child. Standing alone. Staring up at the road. Waiting. The end. The last call from the CB radio. It happened in early January of 2021, on Highway 64, deep in the mountains of North Carolina near the Nantahala National Forest. It was around 3:05 a.m., the coldest part of the night, when the mountains become nothing but black silhouettes pressed against the fog. I was hauling heavy electrical cabinets toward Asheville, following a route most drivers avoid after dark because of the sharp turns, sheer drops, and wildlife that wander the road like ghosts. The air was freezing, so cold that the edges of my windshield frosted over each time I blinked. My CB radio had been silent all night, only occasionally crackling with static as the mountains interfered with the signal. The forest on both sides of the highway looked darker than usual, so dark it felt like my headlights were swallowed by it. The only sound was the low rumble of my engine and the occasional creak of the trailer shifting behind me. I hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving Franklin 40 minutes earlier. The isolation was absolute. I was coming around a wide bend near mile marker 312 when it happened. My CB radio crackled suddenly. Not static. Not a random burst of noise. A voice. Low. Strained. Desperate. This is, anyone copy, this is. I didn't mean to crash. I jerked my eyes toward the radio, my foot already easing off the gas. The voice cut in and out, buried under static but unmistakably human. Please, brakes, someone, anyone here. Then nothing. Just static. I grabbed the mic. This is northbound Highway 64, do you copy? Repeat, do you copy? Silence. I waited, leaning forward, listening. Then the voice returned, this time clearer. Please, please, don't let me go off. The sound of metal grinding filled the background, a hollow screeching noise that made my blood run cold. It sounded like a trailer jackknifing. The kind of sound drivers never forget. I pressed the mic again. What's your location? What's your mile marker? Static. Then. Truck, 17, brakes failed, can't, hold. The transmission cut off. My stomach twisted. I knew that stretch of road. I knew how easily a driver could lose control on those curves. I leaned forward, scanning the highway ahead of me. Nothing but fog and dark forest. Truck 17, do you copy? I repeated into the mic, tell me your direction. I can call it in. Just answer. The radio hissed. Then a loud metallic bang echoed through the speaker. Followed by a deep, guttural groan of twisting steel. Then silence so sudden it felt like the entire world had stopped. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, heart pounding. The forest around me was still, unnervingly still. A thick fog drifted across the road, brushing against my tires like cold hands. I stepped out of the cab with my flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist. The guardrail on the right side was bent in a strange angle, as if something had hit it before sliding off the road. Fresh scratches marked the metal. Deep, violent gouges. And below them, the ground was disturbed. Heavy tracks. Mud pushed aside. Grass flattened. Something big had gone over the edge. I climbed down the embankment slowly, breath shaking in the cold air. The forest below was thick, tangled with underbrush and old fallen pines. My flashlight beam swung across branches and rocks until it hit something metallic. A flash of chrome. A trailer corner. Then the dark shape of a cab collapsed into the earth, crushed at the front and tilted sideways as if it had rolled. My pulse hammered harder. I stumbled forward, sliding down the slope, landing beside the twisted wreckage of a semi-truck. The front windshield was shattered inward. The driver's door hung open. The roof was flattened so badly I knew nobody could have survived that impact. I swallowed hard and shone the light inside the cab. It was empty. Completely empty. No driver. No blood. Just a torn seatbelt dangling uselessly in the dark. "Hello?" I shouted. "If you can hear me, call out." Silence. I circled the truck, searching for footprints, signs of movement, anything that would tell me the driver had crawled out. But the dirt around the cab was untouched except for the deep impressions of the crash. My heart tightened. No tracks. No trails. No signs of life. The cold deepened, sharp enough to sting my fingers. The fog pressed closer, thicker. The forest seemed to swallow the wreckage. For a moment, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, like something unseen was watching from the darkness. Then my CB radio, still in the truck above, crackled faintly down the slope. I froze. A whisper came through the static. "Help, me." My blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't coming from the cab of the wrecked truck. It was coming from my truck. I scrambled up the embankment, panting hard, slipping on the wet dirt until I reached the shoulder. My radio buzzed again, louder this time. "Anyone here? Brakes failed." I grabbed the mic with shaking hands. "I found your truck. I found the crash site. Where are you?" Static. Then, "I didn't mean to crash." The same exact words. The same tone. The same breath spacing. A recording. A loop. I slowly sat back into the driver's seat, staring at the radio as the voice continued. "This is, if anyone hears, brakes failed." A loud crash boomed through the speaker, metal twisting, glass shattering. The same collision I had heard earlier. Then, "Help me." But this time, the voice wasn't coming from the speaker. It came from behind me. Inside the cab. I felt the breath on the back of my neck, cold, damp, trembling. My entire body froze. Very slowly, I turned my head toward the sleeper behind me. No one was there. But the air had changed. I could see my breath now, white mist drifting upward. Then, just behind my ear. "I never made it home." I screamed, scrambling for the ignition. The engine roared to life. My headlights blasted across the empty highway. I floored the gas, tearing down the road with my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. The CB radio hissed one last time. "Don't let me crash again." I yanked the cord and pulled the radio out completely, throwing it onto the passenger seat. I didn't stop until I reached Asheville at sunrise. Hours later, after I'd unloaded the trailer, I asked a state trooper about any recent truck accidents near that stretch. He studied me quietly for a long moment before answering. "There haven't been any crashes on that part of 64 for years." "That can't be right," I insisted. "I saw one. I climbed down into it." He hesitated. "Truck 17?" he asked. My heart stopped. He nodded slowly. "That wreck's been down there since 1994. I stared at him, unable to speak. "The driver died on impact," the trooper continued. "He was calling for help on the CB as he went over. Last transmission ended mid-sentence." He sighed. "Some drivers still hear him." I didn't sleep for days. And even now, years later, whenever I drive past empty mountain roads at night, I keep my CB radio off. But sometimes, even without it plugged in, I swear I still hear a faint whisper from the dark. "Help, me." The end.